webinar presentation, and it's about patient and public involvement and engagement. So my name's Helen Hurst. I'm part of the CCR team, and we're doing this on behalf of CCR. I work as a consultant nurse in the organisation, and I also have a academic position at the University of Salford as Professor of Nursing. I'm going to hand over to my two co-presenters. So starting with you, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Pearce. I'm a renal dietitian at Salford, and I am coming to the end of my year-long internship with the CCR and the renal team, working alongside Helen and Cathy.
Okay. And hi, so I'm Cathy. I'm a nurse researcher, so nurse by background. I've been involved in research and sort of different practice development projects in different ways, inside and outside the NHS, using lots of different methods, but a lot of it's been around co-production and PPI. So that's why I'm here today, and I'm currently working with Helen and Rebecca within renal research. So.
Okay, so I'm just going to screen share to start us off, hopefully. So everyone, can you see that okay? We all happy? Yeah.
Yep.
Good. I might sort of turn my face this way, everyone, just because I've got two screens and it might be that I just have to look at that screen. So apologies for that. So is it I just need to put it on slideshow. Okay, that's better. I can't see anybody now, so if which is quite good, but it means I'm talking to a blank screen. So we've got 1 hour, and hopefully we won't be talking for the whole hour, and we're going to do it in 3 parts this session. Hopefully we'll have enough time at the end so we can have a bit of a discussion and have some questions. So we have introduced ourselves, so I don't need to spend any time on that first slide. So I'm going to just go through, and this is what we're going to try and cover in the session. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about policy standards and principles when we're talking about PPIE. So the kind of stuff that guides our practice for patient and public involvement. Rebecca's going to share her experience of lessons of how to get started in PPIE. And then Cathy's going to give us some real examples of PPIE from studies that we've been involved in. So I think it's really good to start with a definition. And you'll see throughout this that actually underpinning a lot of the guidance for patient and public involvement comes from the NIHR. So that's the National Institute for Health Research. Hopefully everybody's heard of that, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about NIHR. But they define public involvement in research as research being carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about or for them. So we've all heard the mantra, nothing about us without us, but that really is what underpins PPIE. And I would say that in the last 10, 15 years, this has become a really important part of research and research activity. So it's really important we know how to do it and we know what standards we should be following. And hopefully you'll get a flavour of that today. We probably could have done, 2 to 3 hours on this, but this will be a kind of snapshot and hopefully a taste of what you need to do if you're thinking about PPIE. So I've mentioned the NIHR, and I think as a resource, it's fantastic for getting information about patient and public involvement. If you just Google PPIE, all the hits that will come up will be documents relating to the NIHR. So there's a fantastic website. There's lots of resources on there. So, if you don't know about it, then you need to go on and have a look at it and start having a look at those resources. And within that, there are some standards for public involvement. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those standards. It's all there available, so you can go onto the website and have a look for yourselves, but it kind of hopefully will give a bit of context about what we talk about today. I am relying on Cathy and Rebecca to jump in if I've gone over time, because I know what I'm like. So the standards for public involvement, this is what it looks like as a snapshot. What's really good about this document for the standards is instead of it just being very, very dry, it actually helps you to think about questions that you need to ask for public involvement and PPIE. And that's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll just keep saying PPIE, I think, for short. And hopefully all of you are here today because you are either involved in research or getting involved in research or looking at getting involved in research where you need to think about PPIE. And, you know, there are many parts and many ways that PPIE can be involved in research, but underpinning it all are some basic principles. So when I said in the last 15 years, this has become very important. If we think back 15, 20 years ago, there just used to be little sections within grants and research about PPIE, and it was very tokenistic. And things have changed and moved along since then because of obviously that statement that I put up at the beginning. And this is about people being involved for the right reasons and being, you know, in partnership with us as we do research. But if we just pick a couple of things from here, and they're all really important, but if you look at obviously communication, it, you know, underpins everything we do, but it's important for PPIE. You have to think of how you communicate, what methods you communicate, but it will underpin everything you do from the PPIE. But obviously inclusivity is really critical, and I know now that in some of the big NIHR grants, this is going to be really scrutinised, really to look at. You're going to have to demonstrate how you have tried hard to ensure that there's good representation, and particularly in PPIE. Now, this can be quite challenging. I've run PPIE groups for many years, and often, particularly when you work in a specialist area like I do in kidney medicine, there's often the same patients that come forward to get involved in things, and we have to make a bit of an effort to try and widen that and ensure that we have got representation of our population because everybody has a voice. But some of the questions that it asks, particularly in the document, is, you know, one of the first questions is, are you approaching the right members of the public or the right patients to be involved? Have they got the lived experience in the area that you are interested in? And are they representative of the population that you are serving? So, you know, like I said, the document is really quite helpful in getting you to think about how you would demonstrate that you are achieving those standards that's written. So alongside that, NIHR have produced key principles. Now, I think if you look at these key principles, you could really apply them to any team that you work in. I think, you know, respecting and valuing the knowledge of everyone who's working together, I would say, you know, underpins successful teams. But when we're thinking about research, and particular PPIE, it is recognising and valuing the knowledge of the patient and public involved in your research. So they will have lived experience, and I have learned, and I'm sure many of you have, that sometimes the most valuable contribution to discussions are from your PPIE members. I recently was involved in interviewing for grant applications, and every time I do things like that, the PPIE members actually often ask the best questions of the researchers. They will often find things that we haven't thought about. So, you know, really respecting their value and knowledge. And it is about that sharing of power. When you think about it, if you are at a very early stage of thinking about starting PPIE, you know, there is a power imbalance, isn't there? We are the clinicians and we've got the knowledge. Therefore, it's deemed that we have the power. It doesn't have to be like that. So it's about the joint ownership and about how we work together. So there's an awful lot in there about that sharing of power, and then it's building and maintaining relationships. And I think hopefully that is going to come across a lot in the next two presentations. It's really hard to sometimes to build those relationships, especially if it's people you've never met before. So, but it's really critical for successful PPIE. I've just included this, and Cathy may talk a little bit more about this. When you go on to the guidance about PPIE, there's a whole section on co-production, and it does get used a lot. People will say we're co-producing, but it's really understanding what co-producing is. But it is an approach in which the researchers, practitioner and the public work together. So this is about working together and not just that you've involved PPIE. It's quite powerful, and it can really help shape a project if you include co-production. And again, it's about that sharing of power, but it's also that generation of knowledge. And if you've got patient and public involvement, that generation of knowledge is that shared partnership. And then what I wanted to just kind of finish on is thinking about, okay, if we do PPIE, how do we know we're doing it well? How do you demonstrate impact? And what other guidelines are there? And there are now really important guidelines that can help you. So at the top there, you've got the GRIP2 reporting checklist. So GRIP2, I think for particularly any big grant application or any research project, you should be looking at GRIP2. Okay, it helps you to think about, how do I report the PPI involvement for this project? And it can be just a small project, so you can describe and try to demonstrate how you have used the PPIE through the project. So it's really nice. It's kind of, the only way I can explain it is there's long documents and there's short documents, so it depends on the size of your project. But if you look at any publication that talks about PPIE and how they've used PPIE, they will make reference to GRIP2 and using that checklist, and it would be really important to include in an application. I've put the other document that's quite useful is the impact assessment framework. So this again is a guide to help you to think about, how do you demonstrate impact? Now, this document talks about the complexity of demonstrating the impact of PPIE in your work, in your project. And it talks about values and approaches. And the easiest thing to think about impact assessment, I think, is when you think about how have the PPIE influenced the project that I'm doing? So were they involved from the very beginning in the design of the project? And if so, how did they help shape and influence? Have they been involved in the design of the actual methods? You know, all of the component parts where you've utilised PPIE, you can include in your impact evaluation. And again, that's really powerful, and it's really important for dissemination. So it is about thinking about not just doing PPIE, is how you demonstrate that the PPIE has made a difference. So I'm going to hand over now to Rebecca, who's going to talk about her experience. So are you happy to come in, Rebecca?
Yeah, have you got my slides, Helen? Or do I share
have.
them?
If I press next.
Well, super, thank you. Okay. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I am a renal dietitian at Salford in the NCA, and I'm coming to the end of my research internship with the CCR. You can go to the next slide, Helen. Thank you. I am an early career researcher, so I'm just dipping my toes in still, gaining experience this year, but I do have a 15 years of clinical experience in my area in renal nutrition, and it's through that and through seeing what I see as a growing gap between what we're expecting of our patients for their nutritional management and their ability to, or their resources to meet that expectation. Sorry, there's a dog being noisy in the background. that gap is growing. So maybe the resources they have around education or social support, access to food, that seems to be getting bigger. And there's even more hurdles and even bigger gap for some patients in some patient groups. And I guess that's where PPIE and how that would help guide research to look at that gap became an area of interest to me. So when I started my internship and started discussions with Helen, who's my supervisor, I brought up this interest in PPIE, and she's provided me the opportunities to explore that further and connected me with people who already have experience in that area and some shared interests as well. And part of the internship has been helping Helen and Cathy set up the PPIE group for the Donald O'Donoghue Renal Research Centre, DRRC, which is the research team within the NCI renal team. And renal, the NCI really has a very well-renowned and well-established research sector. But they didn't have an established PPIE group. So the renal team can be involved in many studies at any given time. And we're relying on a couple of patients for that PPIE input rather than a group of patients with diverse backgrounds and experiences. So really, that as a team, they saw the value of having the PPIE set up. So this is a long-term PPIE group rather than specific to a project. And it will be running, like I say, long-term, and we're supporting and training them to ensure they feel empowered and valued and are as useful as possible for the research. So alongside that, as well as part of my internship, I've started doing some stakeholder conversations with patients around my interest in research. And that's been really useful for me to kind of see, Helen was referring to that power balance, the power imbalance that we often, or I'm very aware of as a clinician, especially when you're speaking to somebody maybe who's having dialysis and you're kind of stood over them, and it can feel like there's a power imbalance, and it's really hard to actually hear their real thoughts and feelings around something. Whereas speaking to patients as a researcher allows you to kind of empower their experience and learn from their thoughts, experience and views on things, rather than it being the clinician, the one with the power. So that's been really useful. Can I have the next slide, Helen? Can I have the next slide, Helen? If you...
Sorry, I thought I pressed it. Let me try
again. Have I lost my place? There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. So as Helen and Cathy and I were talking about setting up the PPIE for the renal team, and we were thinking about how we recruit into that, how the meetings will run, how we communicate with people. And the three themes that kind of came up were thinking about involving the right people, involving enough people, and involving people in the right way. And Helen has covered some of this, and Cathy will talk about some of this again and what she's talking about, because it is so key to having meaningful PPIE. So thinking about the right people, obviously we want people with lived experience of kidney disease. And Helen and myself have contact with those patients who work together clinically, so we were able to recruit directly, and also some other key members of the renal research team that understood the importance of PPIE and the vision for the team also helped with some recruitment. We were also quite deliberate about how we recruited, as Helen mentioned, the importance of diversity as well. So many of our renal patients are people from ethnic minority groups, and we know they're underserved and underreached as part of research, so we were very deliberate about trying to recruit diversity as part of the group as well. And then following on to that is the involving enough people. So we want to involve enough people for the breadth and depth of experience and opinions to be represented, that represents our patient group. And that could be, for example, we cover a very large geographical area, so from Wigan right round to Oldham and then back to Salford again. So we wanted to cover that. We want to think about covering various age groups. So I think PPIE often is older retired people. We want to make sure we're having younger people's views represented as well and experiences. We already mentioned the importance of diversity and ethnicity, but also culture. and also a wide range of CKD kidney services that have been accessed, so dialysis, transplant, various specialist clinics. And I think also kind of social demographic as well, making sure we've got people representing all of those different groups. So for us, that ends up being quite a large group. We've got 10 currently involved, and we're hoping to get that to about 20 to kind of really represent the diversity of our patient population. But that may be different for you depending on your patient group and what your project actually is. Another part of involving enough people is to kind of understand and respect the limitations that some of the patients involved in PPIE might have. Many are obviously living with chronic illness. Some people are attending dialysis multiple times a week, multiple appointments, very energy levels, and obviously still trying to fit normal life, family life, working life in and around that. So we wanted to make sure that it was respectful to our patients, to the people involved in the PPIE, that they could dip in and out as much as they needed to, and leave when they need to, come back again. So we've made it clear that we want the group to be fluid, and that the commitment can be as little as what they feel able to do, or as much as what they feel able to do. So that's another reason for having enough people in our situation. And then involving people in the right way. We wanted to make sure that we include people from the very beginning. So like Helen said, it's through the whole journey. So in the development of the research question, in the delivery of research, and the dissemination of research, and along that way to build their skills and knowledge. Part of that is communicating with the researchers and making sure they understand the expectations we have for getting involved with the PPIE group and approaching them. Ensuring that there's clear expectations for how the kind of feedback they give at the end of their research, when that's completed, coming back to the PPIE group and explaining the impact that the PPIE feedback has had on the research. Have the next slide, Helen, please. So then just some practical considerations and things that I've learned in the last 6 months of kind of setting this group up. The first thing is, don't underestimate the amount of work, time, effort that setting a PPIE group up in a meaningful way takes. At the beginning of any project or setting up PPIE, plan for recruitment time, plan for any training you might need, plan for part of your budget, thinking about how you reimburse patients for their time, so not as a payment but as a gratitude for them sharing their expertise and their knowledge. There's some guidance from the NIHR around what that should look like. Other costs you may need to support patients with might be about travel, childcare, other caring costs, things like the cost of venues or any catering that might be needed. That all needs to be planned into the beginning of a project. Communication also needs to be planned. So at the very beginning, set out how you're going to communicate, how often you're going to communicate, and revisit that. Again, the communication can take time to hone and to get right for your group. It'll be different for different patient groups. We're using email as our primary way to communicate with patients who are in the group, mainly because that's the quickest and most efficient way for us to share information and larger amounts of information. But that has been difficult for some people. A few needed a bit of support initially, and there are a couple more who are going to need ongoing support with emails. So we have a couple of patients that are members of the group we call each time we send an email now, so that they check their emails, open that up. They might stay on the phone while they read it, answer any questions they have around the email. And again, that requires time. So yeah, that thinking about what works for your group will be important. We also then have revisited that communication with patients in the actual meetings. So on the second meeting, we spent quite a lot of time talking about how communication had been initially, how people were finding the emails, whether they were clear, how we could improve that communication. And from that, we've gone away, made some changes. For example, we've requested an email address that we're going to use just for emailing the group, so that it's clear who the email's from. It's very visible to them. And we've also written some bit of a guide for us about how we word and lay out an email so it's consistent each time an email is sent. So things like expectations about whether a reply is needed, timescales, all of that is very, very clear. We've thought about the font we use, the size of the font, as well as a type of font. So just making that as clear as possible. And we also had lots of discussions with the group to begin with around any communication barriers for them that may not be obvious to us. And then we thought about how we were going to run the actual meetings. So again, this will be different for you depending on your exact need for the PPI, what you're trying to achieve. But for us, because of the geographical spread of our patient group and the commitments people have, like for example dialysis, we decided online was going to be the best way to ensure as many people could take part in the meetings as possible. And it also allowed us to be more flexible with our diaries as the facilitators, and it allows us to invite other people to come and speak to the group without having to physically be there. So all those were benefits to us. We did have some barriers to online meetings. If people are struggling with emails, they're probably going to struggle with Zoom, and that certainly was the case to start with, but nothing that's not been manageable. So we offered to run through Zoom before the first meeting with anybody who wanted that support, and did a dry run with one of the patients as well. Some people just had a family member around for the first meeting just for some tech support, and that worked very well, and then haven't needed them for the future meetings. So just being aware of that. And again, we don't want to pick either online or in-person meetings, and then that means that we miss a whole group of patients, for example, those that aren't just tech savvy, or those that can't travel. So it's making sure that the way our practical considerations are part of maintaining that diversity of patients that can be involved in PPIE. And then, as Helen mentioned, that building the relationships is really important. So some people involved in the group we knew already, but most of them are new to Helen or myself, and certainly Cathy. We spent some time at the beginning of the first meeting getting to know each other, kind of sharing a bit about our own personal lives, or kind of people's own experience of kidney disease, or when they have been involved in research in the past. We have set up some initial guidance around what we share, the privacy around that, kind of online meeting protocol, and then following that, we developed some terms of reference for the group, brought those back to the second meeting and discussed those together, and they've been sent out for further comments from the group so that everyone knows what to expect in the meeting. And some ground rules, I suppose. And then finally, the importance of empowering our patients. So to me, this feels kind of two-pronged. So there's the importance of building confidence and skills and knowledge in the PPIE group, but also the importance of how we communicate, and that needs to be respectful and empowering, both us and the researchers who will be using the PPIE group. So around kind of things like growing people's confidence, it's just the regular meetings. We spent time in the first meeting going through what is research, what does the research pathway look like, at what points might PPIE group be involved in research, each part of that, each stage of the research journey. And then as we go through, we're going to look at particular skills or ways that they may be asked to support a research project. So the first thing we've talked about in the last meeting was plain English summaries. So we brought an example of a plain English summary to the group, and allowed the group to go through that together. We gave them some pointers about what they might want to look for when going through a pretty English summary, and just really reinforced how important that feedback is, that the researchers want the feedback, that their views, that their thoughts on that, as Helen said, are incredibly useful. They see things that other researchers aren't going to see. So it's empowering them, that it's helpful to the researchers to give the feedback, it's helpful to the patients who may be taking part in that research in the future, and it's also helpful for the actual outcome of the research and the quality of the results. So we're going to continue supporting them in building those skills and that confidence and knowledge in the research world. And again, just the other side I said was the kind of communication in a respectful and empowering way. So again, making sure that we are approaching them in a timely way with clear communication, that the researchers approaching the group are doing that in a timely way, that they're coming back, giving feedback, and showing the results of effective PPIE. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to stop sharing, hopefully.
Right. So yeah, time for me, isn't it? So I'll share my screen. Hopefully that will come up now. Can you see that okay?
We can.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, thank you for that, Rebecca. So I'm sort of going to now move into talking more about some specific examples of how it might work in study design. Obviously, a lot of what Rebecca was talking about there really works whether you're looking at a setting up like a sort of PPI review group, as Rebecca was talking about there, within a specific department, but it really works whether you're looking at in a research study as well. So that's really fantastic overview there from Rebecca and all the work we've been doing the last few months setting that group up. So I've got a couple of case studies that I'm going to share with you and talk about different ways that the design has happened. I'm just going to make sure my phone is on silent. Sorry, there were a couple of pings coming through there. So, and as I mentioned earlier, so I've got quite a sort of diverse background, which will explain some of the stuff I talk around later, because I studied art before I moved into nursing. And as well as training in healthcare research, I quite often use more creative methods such as filmmaking, video making, and co-design approaches. So I sort of got a sort of diverse experience inside and outside of the NHS with the way that I do research. So, moving on to the next slide then. Okay, so it's a bit of an overview of how we've used PPIE in a project I'm doing now currently with Helen, which she's one of the PIs on with PPIE, too many P's and I's going on there, which is the Edna research study. So I'm going to give you some background on that. And then I'm going to talk a bit more briefly about a project I did outside of the NHS, which was much more around patient and public involvement engagement with research implementation of findings. That was with the University of Sheffield a few years ago. There's my MND project to talk about different ways you can use co-design as well. But really sort of thinking about some of the benefits, the complexities, and different ways of navigating that and starting to find your own way of doing this, because it really is about your engagement with people through the project, which is why I love it so much. That's why all the projects I do now involve this in some way, because it is very rewarding to do. So next slide, hopefully. Okay, so bit wordy this slide, but I'm just going to give you some background to the Edna study. So this is the Kidney Older Person Assessment Study, otherwise known as Edna. And just to give you a bit of the background so you can understand how the PPI is fitting into this and the different stages it's working through and how the design is reflected in this. So the aims of the Edna research study is to adapt the comprehensive geriatric assessment, otherwise known as a CGA, to renal care. And the CGA is already a well-tested, well-evaluated tool, which is used for a very sort of comprehensive way of planning very holistic care for older people who are starting to become frail or who are frail already, to really try and tie together their care. So this is used a lot out there, but it's not being used as much as we'd like to see it in renal care. And it's certainly not adapted to that very unique population. So we want to use this to improve care planning and support around treatment decisions for those older people where they're thinking whether dialysis may suit them or whether they're better on conservative management, medication only, different kind of choices like that people might face and thinking about their future care. And we're specifically looking at older, that's 65 and older, frail people with advanced chronic kidney disease. So that's kind of the remit of this research project. And we are presently working on an NIHR program development grant. So this is like a sort of year-long project where we can really test out some of the principles and underlying work that we want to do for the much bigger grant, which we're applying for at the beginning of 2025, which is a program grant for applied research. So that's a much bigger kind of grant. I'm not quite sure how we're planning on running it, Helen, but it's usually like 3 to 5 years, those kind of projects. So, and the PPI and where that's fitting in now, well, if we're going to develop and implement this tool and test it, we've got lots of ideas as clinicians about how we might assess that in practice, like quality of life, mortality, hospital admissions. But what does that actually mean to patients and carers? So what we're doing in this study is running a series of focus groups with patients, carers, and one sort of add-on one with healthcare professionals just to help contextualize stuff. But we're primarily asking these patients and carers what matters most to them. And that is our kind of way of thinking of the practical question, which we can turn into research outcomes that are very focused within their lived experiences. So that's kind of the aim of where we're at now. So a bit sort of thinking about how we've got the PPI team set up, the different phases that's working through in the research design process and how this is sort of fitting into practice. So we started off with one patient and one carer who were actually co-applicants on the bid so far. And they've been involved in the project quite a while, and they've both got quite extensive experience of kidney disease, either living with that or caring for people with kidney disease within their family. Actually, the patient has got experience of PPI and public involvement before, whereas our carer has never done that. So it's a really good balance with the group. And they've been involved from early on in the project design and overseeing the applications for funding to where we've got to so far. And now in what we're doing in this current bit of funding, we've got a couple of groups there. So we've got our PPI team, or we could call them the PPI steering group. It doesn't really matter what we call it, but it's kind of that core hub of people working on this. So we've got the above patient and carer that we mentioned, and we've got a few academics working closely with them initially because it's actually a multi-site study with Lancashire and Hertfordshire. And at Hertfordshire University, we've got a couple of people there who are really focusing on running the PPI group, and I'm linking in with them as well. So we will have smaller meetings about the PPI process and thinking about those elements, but also everybody feeds in to the project planning meetings as well. So really involved across the whole project and thinking about the next bid as well. So the next sort of phase of the design here is what we've called our PAG group, Patient and Carer Advisory Group. So this is the above team, but expanded again. And we have 11 patients and carers who are involved in that. And we've actually got 8 meetings across this phase of the project, the Programme Development Grant. We did actually budget for 6 originally, but we've realised, and this is where you start to realise actually, you can get a lot of PPI in there and it is really helpful. So we've shifted around some of the budgets that we had planned for in-person meetings, and we're actually making 8 meetings now across the project. So that gives you that sort of overview of the levels and the design there. Okay, so thinking a bit now about some of the activities we've been doing in this project and linking it back to some of those principles that Helen introduced earlier from the NIHR. Okay, so thinking back to our PPI team and our co-applicants, that sort of core people who are really involved, and we can say they're definitely really sharing the power of this project, and it's very jointly owned with them. So as we mentioned, they've been involved in developing the present bid and the funding and the project we're on now. So in terms of thinking about the PPI design and what would work for them from their own experiences, and also thinking about participant impact, how we're going to run those focus groups and making sure that that really fits how they might feel. Is it going to be comfortable for them? Is it going to be appropriate for them? And things like that will really help as well, obviously, with getting funding from the NIHR in your bid, and also when you go to get ethical approval, because there'll be a big concern around how does this actually feel for the people taking part in your study. Also, as we've been through the project, they've been absolutely amazing in planning and reflection around these PAG meetings. So thinking about what's going to be the aim of each one, what we're going to share with them, are the slides that we're developing for those meetings, are they working well? And then also reflecting afterwards when we get some really good, and I'll tell you more about the kind of feedback we've been getting, but sometimes it can be quite surprising and quite a lot to navigate. So it's really good to have that kind of debriefing together as a team and those wide range of perspectives. And now our group as well here, our patient and carer, as well as our smaller PPI group, they're all part of involving co-developing the bid for this bigger grant, the next level, the programme grant, and really thinking about getting involved in how we do that and what needs to be in there. So they really become like a real core part of our team. And even the other day, we had a really big meeting with loads of different professors, all kinds of researchers from everywhere, but they were absolutely there on a level with us, chipping in and taking part in that project. So way beyond tokenism. Okay. So a little bit now thinking about how our PAG group have actually been involved in the design of our research. So we've had 5 meetings so far, and this really is about, respecting and valuing the knowledge of all those working together, everybody of being equal importance, and also thinking about the different types of knowledges there are out there, because obviously quite often we're looking at sort of medical-led research, clinical trials, and that's a sort of seen as this kind of knowledge which is very high powered, and more experiential knowledge is traditionally kind of marginalized and from different communities. So it's really about trying to bring that back in and bring that back into the balance. So we've had 5 meetings so far of our PAG group, our patient advisory group. Meetings 1 and 2 were really about establishing those relationships and orientating people to the project. And actually what was really useful in that, we did a little document called Who's Who. So we did, I think the first meeting, there were quite in-depth feedbacks around the group. And from that, we did a little biography of people or got them to send them in. So we've actually got that document that the group can share and look at and refresh their memory. Because also each time you have a meeting, if everybody introduces themselves again, it can be, well, it can put people off. Not everybody likes that kind of round robin of introductions. And also it just saves time, because that can take a long time. And it's just nice for people to refer back to and remind themselves of who they all are and how they fit together. So meetings 3, 4 and 5 have been around the feedback on the design of the focus groups, which I've been leading on in the project. That's my main role, thinking about how we get these focus groups together and how we deliver them. And what's been really key in that, and this is very much what everyone's been talking about before me, it's this feedback loop and really letting people know how they've impacted on this. So each time we've gone back at the meetings, we've had this idea of, well, you've said this is what we've done in response to that. And how they've impacted on what we're doing. So, and just briefly about what's going to come next with our PAG group in this design. So when we get to the analysis of the focus groups, we've actually got our first focus group on Thursday this week, and we've got quite a few over the next couple of weeks. So when we start analysing those focus groups and bringing things together, that's going to be a way of sense checking with people again. So you could have projects where people would be co-researchers and very involved in the project, and they would actually be part of that analysis process. But in this case, it's going to be more the idea of sense checking. We're doing like the sort of heavy work, the heavy lifting of doing that, but then going back to them and just finding out how they're feeling that. Is that working? Is there anything we might be missing there or not quite cottoning on to? Also with developing the bid for the next level of funding. So again, they're not going to be involved in the deep writing of this, but they're going to help inform the vision and helping to shape the PPI aspects. So a really good sounding board there to really bring them into it. And we will be inviting them to take part in the next stage. And again, this is really about that principle of inviting all perspectives and skills and making sure the team includes all those who can make a contribution. So that's kind of some of the design. So sorry, this is a little bit of a wordy slide here. I mean, this is a bit about the kind of feedback we've got back and how we've navigated that as a group, because it's been really interesting. Even though I've been involved in like patient involvement for a lot of years, you still get things that surprise you and amaze you from PPI groups, and that's why it's so interesting. So the main role of the PAG group has been about testing our focus group design, and we've tried out different things with them across these 3 stages. So we were thinking about different analogies we could use to explain this research project, because it's quite a complex set of issues. It's taken us a long time to actually get our own heads around this as researchers about where everything sits. So we tried out a set of slides with analogies and different illustrations. Then we've tried case studies, which were text ones and video ones. And at each of these meetings, actually, we had quite unexpected and quite frank feedback and some quite complex and nuanced discussions with people. We kept thinking, oh, we really like cracking this here. We might just get a little bit of like feedback on refining it. And quite often there were some quite intense comments, like whether the slides could, the analogy patronizing, was some of the imagery borderline ageist, and it was a little bit of a shock to us, but then it really helped us to think and reconsider how we were doing stuff. And actually it was very useful that we've got recordings and we've got meeting notes from these meetings to really help to go back through, because sometimes some of those ones, that kind of feedback can shock you a bit. But going back through, there was so much from different people about, well, yes, some people may find that a little bit patronizing, but we've got to think about all different aspects of the audience we're going to be working with, of the participants in the group. So it was really great for us to go back through, consider and rework. But that was a frequent process, actually, of thinking, well, not exactly back to the drawing board, but okay, we've got to just think slightly differently here, different ways of doing it. And this has really benefited the research through these challenges and these processes. It's really helped us to understand how these complex concepts are best conveyed to the group. I've written myself a tongue twister there, I think. And it's really helped us to hone the concept of what we're doing, and also to really think about how to contextualize what we're talking about within the different within these focus groups we're going to be delivering. And we really feel now, thankfully, because we've only got 2 days to the focus groups, but we've really got the slides and a case study video now very concise. We've really thought about the contextualization, and we feel very confident that actually we're going to be able to keep it on track towards our research question and not sort of open a can of worms to other elements. So, okay. And thinking about the next steps now, so we're starting to plan the next grant. So we've got some very loose ideas from early meetings which have involved our PPI group. So we're thinking about how the next grant, the PPI, is going to be this really overarching and integrating work package that's going to join everything together, not just sort of added on at the end or just its own isolated package. So our PPI group will be involved in steering each work package and also overall steering the project. And this is where I start to move towards a little bit about the MyMND project here as well, which I'm going to tell you about next. So we know we need to, in order to implement and test out this updated kidney context, the CGA, the Comprehensive Geriatric Assessment, we're going to need to have education and implementation materials, which are going to be tailored towards healthcare staff in the kidney units and patients and carers. So obviously we're going to have a PPI group to help us think about what needs to be in there, but actually it needs to go beyond just a bit of feedback every now and again, like we've got with the PAG. We really need people involved in what we call co-design, which is like the next level of this. So, and co-production, which is what Helen was talking about. So really taking every element of this development through. So I'm just going to briefly tell you about the project I did a few years ago. So I'm actually just going to nip onto the website so I can show you what this looks like. So this was obviously done much more with my creative hat on.
Cathy, can I just give you
a 5-minute warning
to the end? Well,
yeah. I'll try.
Okay.
I'll try just to really quickly just show you a little bit. Yeah, obviously I've taken quite a long time.
While you're talking.
Thank you. So this was a way of using co-design, co-production and PPIE to actually take research findings that had been done around experiences of people with motor neurone disease and their hesitancy around taking up different treatment options within motor neurone disease, which can help to improve quality of life. And in this case, we were looking at peg feeding tubes and trying to allay people's fears around that. So we actually took those research findings to our PPI co-design group, and they kind of talked about how the research findings fitted in their real life. So they kind of reappropriated the research, talked about how they would actually use it in real life, and then worked with some web designers who thought about how this could fit into a really easy to use, accessible website. And while me and my colleague were thinking about how we could turn this into written information and video information, and in particular, so Terry down at the bottom left here, he really talked in the workshops about how he had really hesitated getting his feeding tube fitted because he'd never met somebody who'd got one, and he was just so freaked out about the idea. And that gave us kind of the inspiration for the personality of the project and the website, which is you can meet somebody in their own home who is using this, and it feels just like somebody on your own level, as opposed to it being very very clinician led. So that was really the sort of main thing that came from this project, really centered on patient experience. So I could talk for hours about that, but I won't, because I think it's important. I'm just going to wrap up with my own sort of personal reflections from these different projects I've done over the years. And I'd be very happy to talk more to people if they want to talk more about sort of creative methods as well. So these are my own sort of personal reflections. I think openness and vulnerability as a researcher is really important. It's about being willing to be wrong and giving people confidence in what they're doing, and actually feeling a bit of discomfort is a good thing in a project, because it really helps you to it shows that you're learning something new, you're going outside of your comfort zone. And it's finding the balance point, though, to make sure you get good progress, because obviously, depending on the scale of the project, the duration, you could get a lot of feedback that could slow you down. So it's really trying to find a good balance point with people. And just to reflect back on what Rebecca's been doing earlier with her project she's had those stakeholder conversations. So as soon as you start thinking about research projects, start asking people, really build it up from the beginning, really build it into all that planning and get some budget and time in there for it. So, okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cathy and Rebecca. That was fantastic. We've got a few minutes, and I was hoping there might be some questions. We really hope, or a little bit of a discussion, just to tie us off for the whole session. Hopefully, that's really give you a flavour of from where the underlying policies and guidelines. You can put your cameras on, everyone, so you don't have to hide now anymore. A little bit, about the guidance. There's lots of stuff out there to help you. But a real flavour of how it can be done, and how it can be done well, and lessons learned. And I think Cathy's right. I've done PPIE for a long time. I've done it badly, probably in the past at times. And you're just forever learning really on how best to. And I think the budget thing is really key. We had to rejiggle the budget in the project we're doing now, because we'd underestimated. But it's been fine. So I think my lessons are completely overestimate the budget and put plenty of money into anything for PPIE. Claire.
Hi, I was just wondering if there are any training resources on the NIHR website specifically for patients and public. Yeah.
So there are. Rebecca might want to speak to that, because she's looked at that. And I've just add, there's something called the Kidney Patient Involvement Network, which is a national, it's got real legs now, and they offer training. So we have got opportunities in our little world. But Rebecca, do you want to touch on those resources?
It was the training I went on was the PPIE training from Cambridge NIHR group. and it was really useful. They were running a series. I could only get booked on one because they were booked out. It was kind of the end of spring, start of summer. Yeah, and it was very useful information. They didn't have a website or a section to go on. It was Teams training, and they ran a series of about 4 different workshops. So it's worth looking out for that happening again next year. That's the only training I found, I think.
Claire, was your question PPI training for staff or for patients? For staff. Yeah, because we didn't mention, but there is.
Sorry, no, I meant for patients.
Oh,
sorry.
Like, would it be like good clinical practice that they're supposed to do, and then?
No, they don't need to do unless they're consenting for. If they're co-applicants and they're going to consent, they'll need to do the good clinical practice. So there are things, like I said, we've got the Kidney Patient Involvement Network, which is really good, and they offer training. But it's a really good question because so we have offered to do it with our group because we feel we've got the skills to do it, and we probably could do it. But there are examples of like little tiny job descriptions. I don't want to say job description because that makes it sound, but roles and expectations. And I think that's what you have to get right in the very beginning, because I think it's fair to say that you will get patients that join PPIE and they do struggle with understanding what the role is, but it's continuously saying it doesn't matter, whatever you contribute, it's a contribution and it will be valuable. Sorry, there's another question there, David.
Hi, David Thorpe, Director of Nursing at Salford.
Hello.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed. Really interested and really passionate about this particular subject. I think just for a couple of people who mentioned about information, I've always used the Point of Care Foundation, which have done quite a lot in London, and they usually have some staff and patient experience toolkits and videos. So if people want to have a look at that, I've always found that quite useful, just as a kind of my lay person kind of information, not as research based as yourselves, but I find it quite interesting as a starting point and actually giving information to patients in relation to what's the expectations. Thank you. Just really a comment, but thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, David. And another good website for people to look at is the Queen's Nursing Institute. They often have really good materials, actually. Is it Dania? Have I said that right, Dania?
It's Dana, but it's close
Dana.
enough. I answer
Sorry.
for most things. No, it's fine. I just wondered, I work at the Macmillan Support Service, and I look after our patient representative group. And one thing we really struggle with is that kind of recruitment of, like you were saying, inverted commas, not your typical patient. We have lots of people that are willing to give up their time, but we do struggle with that kind of engaging with a diverse population. And I just wondered whether you had any sort of hints and tips around that, or anything that you'd found, or is it just plugging away?
Well, I can comment, and Rebecca, you can, and I think Cathy can. It's really hard. It's if you're clinically connected, it's really helpful because you're connected into the people who you're trying to recruit. So that certainly does help. I think what the reason we're really trying hard is because then it works as like that peer support network. One of our nephrologists actually has got an RFPB grant and is looking at gathering biographies from people from particular ethnicity to get them more engaged in research, and certainly in the kidney world it's hit the national press. So I don't think there's an easy solution. I think if you get one person connected, and I think it's thinking about language. So for our Edna project, we have got language specific researchers costed in who are going to be doing what Cathy spoke about in the focus groups, doing interviews, so that we are not excluding people who English isn't their first language. So it's really thinking about that. How can you access translation, interpretation, because it might be that you need that to go and talk to somebody. I don't think there's a silver bullet for this. There's not it's just keep trying. I don't know, Rebecca, Cathy, if there's anything. I mean, Rebecca, you did touch on it. You know, sometimes you might have to have several conversations with someone.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, and I think as well, maybe it's something we're thinking about is diversity within the staff involved as well.
Yeah.
And that's something we've highlighted is that we want to look at and adjust, is to make sure that the staff that are involved in supporting the PPIE group, there's diversity there as well. But yeah, it is hard work, but it's worth it. Yeah, just keep going.
And just to add what Helen was saying around the language specific research team, it's been interesting actually as we've been, I mean, that's more like for recruiting the participants, but I think the principles still apply wider. So when people have been maybe a little bit reluctant to take part or get their wives to be involved as carers, and we discussed that with the researcher who's got that experience, they've highlighted all different types of things, like actually, you know, the sort of building that trust with services, which may be very different in communities, particularly people who may be coming from migrant and marginalised communities where services are involved in a different way. It's kind of like they need to build that rapport first before then gradually, if you build that trust, you can sort of roll out more in those groups. So I think it's things like that. So definitely, as Rebecca was saying, getting you know, much more diversity within those teams to start with. From you know, that's what we're seeing, because obviously we're very aware of our own backgrounds. So,
and I think you've seen that, Cathy, within our group, that the patients that we have recruited that are maybe from the minority backgrounds are people that we have relationships with already, so that we know clinically already and have known for many years. So I think that has supported that integration.
I mean, if you've got a way into any community events, you know, it's worth thinking about going to community events. We've done that in Rochdale and places, and you just go and say, hi, I work in such a service. We're always looking for people who are interested in having a say, and even if you sell it as service, discussions. So, you know, we have to think differently, but we have got a workforce that can help us, which is what we've talked about, and as Rebecca says, having more diversity in our own team, I think would help.
Yeah, and shifting methods away from like the more traditional sort of focus groups, which can feel quite pressuring, or workshops, and thinking about different formats seems to be really key. Maybe more one-to-one working and things like that, or just different contexts that we may not have thought about before. So
okay, I think that's pretty perfect timing, 2 minutes past 2. There's no more hands up, so this will be recorded, so if anybody you work with you feel would get any value, then they can watch it recorded. Ellie will put it on our website, won't you, Ellie? But thank you everybody for joining. Thanks Rebecca and Cathy, and thanks Ellie for being there in the background organising us, and see you all soon, hopefully.
Thanks
everyone.
for coming.
Can we just stay on?
Yeah, absolutely.